My name is Henk Mulder. I lead the digital cargo development at IATA, which is one of our priorities, as Brendan pointed out earlier on. And today I'd like to sort of take you through the roadmap that we've been following for a little while, and that will take us a little bit further into the future as well. And so it's a fairly long span. This whole story started back in the year 2000, when digitalization or electronic documents became a priority for the industry. And not just this industry, but many industries at that time were actually going through this process. And so the first stage in this was our eAirWheel program that kept us busy for about 15 years. We're now sort of getting to the end of that, and a new program has taken place that is actually taking us from electronic documents, which was the focus there, to data. And so we have developed data sharing standards, the ability for airlines and their partners to share data upstream and downstream the supply chain and the transport chain as well. All of this isn't really about data itself, it's more about what we do with the data. And so there's been a lot of focus on e-commerce, which is a topic that was mentioned a few times, and I'll mention it again a little bit later. But also things like trade facilitation, which is ultimately what air freight is all about. It's the movement of freight. This is leading to the end of this decade to what I refer to as data-centric air cargo. Data is something that will ultimately be driving many industries. In fact, the media itself is an industry that's highly data-driven, and so air cargo will actually follow suit. So I'd like to move into each of these areas and give you some comments on that. Firstly, about One Record. One Record essentially is the name of that program about how airlines can share data with their partners. Partners like forwarders, customs, ground handlers, governments, and of course, the customer, the shipper, as well as the consignee. And so One Record is a technical standard. It tells companies how they can do this. It doesn't do it for them, so it's not a platform. One of the things that it will do initially, the very first thing that it will deliver is visibility and transparency in the supply chain. When we interview shippers, for example, they often refer to logistics and transport as a black hole. You take a package, you ship it, and it's gone. Until the other sender comes out of the system, and then you know where it is and when. So that's something that will be addressed, which means that all parties in the supply chain will always know where things are. And not just when you're buying e-commerce with Amazon, where often you have a pretty good idea where it is, but any type of shipment. So that visibility and transparency is good for the customer, but it's also very good for the supply chain, so they can actually manage the progress, the disruption, and anything that needs to be managed in the meantime. This all will lead to data opportunities. In fact, when you put data standards in place, data sharing standards, you significantly increase the data that you have access to, but also the data that you produce. And as you may know, technologies like artificial intelligence, which we're seeing popping up everywhere now, they need massive amounts of data, which we don't have at the moment. Our data is very limited. And so a standard like One Record will actually multiply the amount of data that airlines have access to, as well as their partners. The other thing that we will see by the end of this decade is data isn't something just to help you improve your operations, your efficiency. It's an asset itself. And so as we increase the focus on data, companies will be able to start looking at data as an asset, make investments, but also perhaps sell it to other parties. Now, where are we in terms of progress with this One Record data standard? We have been working on this since the year 2017, and initially a lot of it was around creating awareness of the opportunities, what it is that we wanted to achieve, but also how it worked. What we saw during the pandemic was a significant increase in the interest in digitalization by airlines. It's not surprising, everybody had to work from home, so physical systems, physical processes didn't work very well anymore, and so we had to shift to digitalization at the core of our operations. And so that interest has put a lot of pressure on programs like this to deliver. And so on request of the airlines, they all said, we need something to work towards. We can't just work, we need a deadline. And so we're currently introducing, on the request of the airlines, a deadline, and say by the 1st of January 2026, everybody needs to be able to exchange data using this standard. That is a fairly tough deadline that we have to meet. But actually, it will allow us to focus on that. It will allow us to prioritize the work that we do at airlines, as well as their partners. I mentioned the forwarders, but also the ground handlers, the customs, all sorts of parties that really need to come on board with this. So it's something that we can work towards, and it's a very important objective for this industry. But as I said earlier, it isn't about digitalization, it is about trade more than anything else. And so we have a lot of focus on trade facilitation, working together with, for example, the WTO on the trade facilitation agreement. We work very closely with World Customs Organization on their digital standards, on their requirements, for example, for single window declarations. And then we have our own developments around advanced cargo information and preloading, which is introduced, as Brendan said earlier, in a number of countries. Now, they all have a common point, and it's all about data. These processes of trade can only go faster if we have data to support that. And so from a digital program, we're very much in contact with all of these entities to understand what are their priorities, what are they doing, and can we align that? And so the program around our digital roadmap also includes working with these entities and support them in their developments, such as, for example, all the work that they're doing on e-government. Which then brings me to e-commerce. We've already seen some numbers here, that 80% of all e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce, is carried by air. That's a big chunk. The other one we saw earlier is that 18 to 20% of all air freight is now e-commerce, which is a significant shift in what the carriers are actually carrying in their aircraft. Now there is a strong link with digitalization. Again, I put here that e-commerce is the ultimate digital experience for most people. In fact, e-commerce is one of the first industries that was entirely created from a digital environment. It is the ultimate digital native, I could even say. There's only two industries that were before that. You're one of them, media and research was before that. But it's a big one, it's much bigger than any of those. If you look, for example, at how the customers have behaved their behavior, sort of changed their behavior, what you see in this diagram here is the columns represent the value of the e-commerce over time. And you can see that number is going up steadily. The blue actually is the actual data, and the yellow or orange, I'm colorblind, I can't see the difference, is the other one that is forecasted. And so this year, we will reach $5.7 trillion there. For context, the global economy is worth $100 trillion. So 5.7% of the global economy is e-commerce, which is big. The other thing you see here is that red line, it's the proportion of e-commerce versus retail. And so what you see, we're sort of getting very close to a quarter of all retail is, in fact, e-commerce, retail. So for us to be able to support that industry as airlines, we have to be able to support also the expectations of the customer, which is speed. When we order something, we'd like to get it the next day or in the next few days. And so the ability for e-commerce companies to deliver on their promises, the supporting infrastructure, including airlines, have to also support that. And again, given the short timelines, data is actually what will allow us to do that. Now, all of this is sort of heading towards that end of the decade I was talking about, the data-driven cargo, the data-centric cargo. And along this roadmap that I've mapped out, there's lots of things we'll see being developed in the next years to come. These are just a few examples I'm showing here. One area that took a significant boost during the pandemic was, in fact, the distribution of air cargo rates and bookings made online. Pre-pandemic, that was not so obvious, but post-pandemic, nearly every airline is now engaging in this business, and all of that is supported, of course, by data and digitalization. Another one that I would like to highlight is something that IATA has done around, for example, our CAS program, which is the program we have for settling the funds between forwarders and the airlines. This has also gone through a high degree of innovation in the last few years. And this year we delivered a new CastLink tool for the Americas through CNS, and there's some other deliveries of this program that we call CAS 2.0 that'll be delivered by the middle of next year. I think in the end, certainly at the moment, the airline industry is very much behind digitalization, is very strongly driving towards that. And hopefully when you look around yourselves, you will see that all the news nearly includes news about that. So by the end of the decade, I think we'll be looking at a very different industry. There'll be no looking back, but in the meantime, I think we'll have a lot of fun delivering that. So with that, I will stop my delivery. There you go. If there are any questions, obviously I'm happy to take them.
Thanks, Henk. Any questions for Henk? No. Thank you. Explained everything perfectly. Thanks, Henk.